Still have it when I either go into a rest home or drop dead. I've got
My father lived in Onehunga.
Right up here against the rafters we have one of the original name boards, which would have been from 1925. There would have been 4 of these, 2 forward and 2 aft. My name's Barry Davis. I've been a volunteer for the best part of 10 years. I've been interested in these ferries since I was a child, born in St Mary's Bay, where I could see most of the ferries coming and going every day of the week. For Toroa, she was the last of 8 that were built in the 20th century, built 1925. She was built by George Nicol. George Nicol only built about 1 other. He primarily built vehicular ferries, and the balance of them were built by Charles Bailey. The first was the Albatross, built in 1904. So we've got 21 years between the Albatross in 1904 and the other 7 that was built, generally an improvement on each other. She was built for the Devonport service, and that's where she stayed. And even when the bridge opened, of course, the Devonport service was the only one that was retained, and of course she kept that service going, along with her near sister, the Makora. She had one exact sister, the Takapuna, that had been built in 1924, rather bizarrely built for a rival ferry company, but within a couple of years that ferry company was sold to the Devonport Steam Ferry Company. The passenger services all ran from the ferry buildings at the bottom of Queen Street. From 1925 to 1980, she was the Devonport ferry with the Makora. They took 1,300, but the others varied. Takapuna would have been the same, and Makora would have been the same. Passengers were impatient to get off as she came into the wharf, be it in this case either at Devonport or coming into the ferry buildings. So passengers would either, as she's coming alongside, jump ashore. Sometimes they missed and ended up in the water. But one particular, that was not unusual, but one particular issue, she's coming into the ferry buildings and the Makora was already berthed there. So she's coming along quite close alongside the Makora to go to her berth astern of the Makora. And as she's doing that, a passenger decided, I can't wait for this, jumps from the Toroa onto the Makora to cross the cabins of the Makora and then get ashore on the wharf. But he didn't know that the Makora had actually started to move. So he jumped on board her, but by the time he'd got his way across the side, she'd moved away from the wharf too far. So he had to do a return trip to Devonport and back before he could get off. Women did it too, and schoolboys did it. And sometimes, as far as the schoolboys and the woman was concerned, I know, they'd be hooked out of the harbour because the ferry's only slightly moving, and put in the engine room to dry out a bit until they got to their destination. And then there's, okay, you can go ashore now. There was no inquiries, there was no first aid or anything else. They'd only got wet. With fogs, most of them at one time or other ran aground, usually coming into the wharves. The Devonport Wharf was one, and the Northcote Wharf was another one, where from time to time different ferries ran aground. But it wasn't a major. Obviously with the fog, they're not moving that fast. So other than that, they run aground, they might get off, or they might have to wait until the next tide. One anecdote is one of the Devonport ferries, and I don't know whether it's a tow rower, but it could have been, ended up down by Bean Rock Lighthouse. There was no radar, there wasn't even radios on them. So it was very much up to the master finding his way across the harbour. I can give you an anecdote, and it was not the tow rower, and it was World War I. Two of the ferries actually bumped into each other in a fog. Did no damage to each other, it was just a slight bump. A woman passenger on one of them see this ferry loom out of the fog and bump her. She became hysterical, and the anecdote is that one of the crew got a bucket of water and threw it over to, quote, settle her down. From time to time they ran excursions to Waiheke, to Motor Tap and Motor He, and even as far up as Herald Island. The first steam-operated ferries on the harbour began in the 1860s. There's been services across Auckland Harbour ever since. Particularly towards the end of the 19th century, the paddle steamers were used all the time for excursions, and there were wharves at places like Takapuna, Mairingi Bay, St Heliers, which was one of the services that did operate until 1925. So they could basically go to wharves anywhere. In going up to Herald Island, they would sometimes stop at the Ponsonby Wharf. So wherever there was a suitable wharf and sufficient water, they would stop to pick up excursionists, because before people had their own cars or the 19th century, the ferries were very popular for weekend excursions. And different companies and organisations, church groups and other organisations would hire them, because not all of them ran in the weekends. There were 8 passenger ferries and 7 vehicle ferries operating when the bridge opened. And they did other work. One that I went on in 1960, the Chilean barkentine training ship came here for the first time, the Esmeralda. And the 3 steam ferries went out to greet her out towards Rangitoto Channel and follow her in. We get back to the last 4 in use. They dropped away. The Takapuna stopped operating in 1966. There was plans to re-engine her. That didn't happen. The Makora stopped in 74. That only left the Toroa as the last original steam ferry, with the Kestrel, which was diesel by then, and the Toroa went on until 1980. And the intention, I understand, was after a refit for her to continue, but unfortunately that didn't happen. So the last one was the Kestrel. We've got the Albatross, which was the oldest. She was also had been converted to diesel in the early 50s, but I understand she had a different hull shape and she needed refastening throughout. So she was just laid up, whereas the Kestrel was only a year newer. The Kestrel kept going. The Pupuki, which is the next oldest, she'd already been laid up for several years, and so she never got back into service, and she was sold about 1965. The next one was the Nairo. She never operated again. She just lay in St Mary's Bay. She eventually sank, pumped out, converted to a restaurant in the Viaduct Basin. She sank there. By then we're up to the time of Auckland with the America's Cup, and there really wasn't room for her with the new bases that were being put. So she ended up being sold and being towed down to Tairua, taken ashore, and that's where she still is. For Toroa, she was pushed a bit from pillar to post as to where she was end up. After 1980, she sat in Beaumont Street, but she was shunted around. She ended up at Birkenhead Wharf, unfortunately, and there's deep water there, and she sank. She had a pump system which was supposed to come on if water accumulated, but for one reason or another, and I'm not quite sure, it didn't operate. She was pumped out. For a short while she sat at Bayswater, but I understand the residents of Bayswater didn't like this eyesore of a badly damaged ferry boat there, and that's when she finally made her way up to the Henderson Creek to here. where she's been ever since.